Hi, this is Phil Shapiro. The public library where I work in Maryland recently bought this book, Supporting Trans People in Libraries. It's an interesting and excellent book. And it was a sight for sore eyes for me because last year our employees at my place of work received LGBT training, allyship training, but it was good but insufficient. And so this book fills in some of the gaps and makes me a stronger ally and helps me make others in our community a stronger ally too. So let's take a look at the book. Here's the book, Supporting Trans People in Libraries by Stephen G. Kruger, who is himself trans and a librarian. This is from the back of the book. I scanned just a part of the back of the book. Book is published by Libraries Unlimited, and they publish other excellent books like Engaging Diverse Learners. Sounds like a really good book. Here's the author. Stephen G. Kruger is the Access and Outreach Services Librarian at Randolph College. He holds an MSLS from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He received the University Diversity Award and the LGBTIQ Advocacy Award. He was chosen as a 2018 American Library Association Emerging Leader, and he founded the Gender Variant LIS Network. Quite a list of accomplishments there. You can find out more from his website, www.stephengkruger.com. Here's the table of contents of the book, and I found the book to be very well organized and comprehensive. I'd say comprehensive without being intimidating, because take a look at the book here. It's a short kind of book, but it really covers a lot of territory. So kudos to the author and editor or editors. They really pack in a lot into this short book. I've read it once and I'll be going back to read it more than once. It's one of those books that you can really benefit from reading it once and then going back and reading it again. I pulled some quotes from the book to give you a flavor of the book. I really like some of these tips that he shares. Trans resources should also be included in other displays and lists, as books by Black authors should not show up only in February. Books on trans topics should be included wherever they are relevant. So that's really interesting. An easy tip for any library to do. And I loved the resources section of the book, especially the trans language primer. Here's a link. Any library could include that link quite visibly on the front of the library website to show allyship. That would be an easy to do thing and a smart thing to do. How to read the book. If you want to read the book from start to finish, by all means do so, but you don't have to do it that way. Very, very interesting. And then I would say the author has great sensitivity when he writes. The information in this book is written from a U.S. perspective, so some of it will be specific and not apply to other locations. So other parts of the world are developing allyship in a different ways. And so this may or may not be applicable to them, but certainly they could be inspired and learn things from this book. Community voices. This is so good. The author found other gender variant contributors to the book and did not edit their writing, just included their writing, which is very, very interesting. And I like there's quick fixes. There's things that you can accomplish quickly at your library, and then the long-term solutions that take months or years. And then that's the kind of thing everybody should be every community should be heading towards. Introduction. For most of my life, I could count on libraries to be spaces where I felt comfortable and safe. When I first came out as transgender, most public places came with an added level of stress and fear. Between restroom policing by security guards and misgendering at the circulation desk, libraries were no exception. So here I work at a public library. I think of the library as somewhat of a sanctuary, but our libraries are not sufficiently welcoming of LGBT community members, so we have to do better. The same institutions that insist everyone should feel welcome are rife with cisnormativity and trans-negative practices. So over centuries, cultural practices have developed that are cisnormative and trans-negative, and we have to be mindful of those and try to adopt better habits. And here's some more. After graduate school, I found myself at a college where I was the only openly trans employee campus-wide, not just in the library. While fortunate to have enough to have an incredibly supportive work environment, I still felt the lack of anyone who shared my identity. This sense of isolation seemed to be fairly typical. So, very, very interesting stuff. I'll let you read some of this stuff. The thing is, some libraries are doing splendidly. There are places that have prominent, accessible all-gender restrooms, and then there's libraries that are more hostile. Gender inclusion is not taught in library school. Well, that needs to change. And it's really part of employee training. Well, that needs to change. Library employees and coworkers. This chapter discusses ways to encourage and support trans and gender variant people as employees and coworkers. And then, as a library worker myself, I loved that he included references to other high-quality, useful books, such as Transgender Employees in the Workplace, A Guide for Employers, by Kermode, 2017 book, a fairly recent book. And here's that book. So I commend that your public library purchase a copy of that book, or your academic library. Here's a quote I found that's interesting that references another book. Who Does the Work? In Out Behind the Desk, Workplace Issues for LGBTQ Librarians by K.R. Roberto acknowledges that trans librarians must often resign themselves to educating their coworkers on allyship, though this is an added labor, perpetuates marginalization without disrupting the dominant group's privilege. So that's why it's important for myself, a person who is cisgender. We need to be on board on being allies, because it's a burden on gender variant individuals to have to do all this work. They call the work EDI work, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion. You can see the acronym down here in the second paragraph. So allyship is something, people need to take up. So here's that other book, Out Behind the Desk. And then here, this is a personal observation from the author of the book. By contrast, I clearly remember the few professors who took steps on their own. A few asked for pronouns as well as names of use when they first took attendance. One emailed all of her students at the beginning of the semester. Among other things, she asked what name and pronouns we wanted her to use. This approach made me immediately comfortable. So I taught a graduate class about 10 years ago, and I knew none of this, and I could have easily said hurtful or harmful things to my students. The college where I at didn't give me any guidance on these kinds of things. And so this book is really important. This book would let me, as a college professor, be just a lot more mindful of people's needs. Put my foot in my mouth less, and also beat myself up less about saying hurtful things. So you saw in the beginning of the book review, I mentioned that Stephen G. Kruger was chosen as an American Library Association Emerging Leader 2018. So I was curious. These individuals who were chosen are the future of the library profession. You'll be hearing about them more often. So I found this in American Libraries magazine, and there's some really interesting little quotes here that I wanted to include in this book review. So here are some of the emerging leaders. And here, let me just read this quote. This is really interesting from Katie Greenleaf. As librarians, we must adapt to a world where books are no longer the main gateway to knowledge, while preserving our rich heritage bound in paper and ink. Most important, we must continue to provide access to information in all its forms to all who seek it. And then this quote from Aisha Connor Gayton. The future of librarianship presents ample opportunities for engagement and collaboration, particularly in support of communities at risk. There will be a need for the library as a study space, meeting space, training center, and we need to be the advocates and activists that sustain these spaces. And this is from Jacqueline Quinn. Librarians will serve as agents of change and curators of truth. As we strive to offer access to our patrons and guide them to valid and accurate information, especially in an era of political tension and net neutrality ceases to be supported federally. And this is from Jenny Yap. There are still so many barriers to students being able to afford an education, and we need to step up our game to ensure that communities have been historically disenfranchised do not continue to be shut out. We need to ask ourselves, how do we reinforce and how can we resist systemic racism? We cannot be and are not neutral. Jenny Yap, thank you. And over here, Kenya Flash. In the parable of the sower, Octavia E. Butler describes God as change, which was perceived as the only constant. The librarian profession is entering a similar stage. In spite of holding on to many values, we need to embrace change in the profession, in the ways we advocate and promote ourselves, and how we preserve and provide access. And here's Stephen G. Kruger with a quote. Successful librarianship can be defined as providing information and support to all, especially where it is most needed. Our best future is one where libraries adapt those ideals to fit their own context, focusing on what works rather than clinging to a traditional definition of what a library or librarian should look like. And here's Twana Hodge. Libraries need to go beyond traditional expectations and change how people perceive them and how librarians perceive their communities. We need to learn more about biases and how they may affect our practices and professions. Well, that's some wise thinking. Elspeth Olson, as a member of the Special Collections community, we need to persist in our efforts to make collections more accessible and approachable. The future must include steady progress in addressing the public's fundamental misunderstanding of the care, use, and value of special libraries, archives, and rare book collections. And here is Tracy Drake. The future will consist of delivering services outside library walls. Successfully connecting with the community hinges on understanding its value systems, needs, and visions. This will help establish the library as an anchor institution and partner with a vested interest in the community's success. Some very wise ideas and thoughts from Tracy Drake. And lastly, I think this is the last one, Kathy Kosinski. Given the increasingly divided and harsh world we live in, the role of librarian will be one of compassion. We will be institutional voices in our users' lives, reminding them that they are heard, they are worthy, and we are here for them. So that's also very, very wise. Now, just as I was making this book review, just about to sit down, I picked up a copy of the Washington Post from January 11th, 2020, and here's a front page article in the Metro section by Hannah Nathanson. An effort to ease the pain of transgender students. And I'll read some of this. Near the end of every summer, as other students picked out colorful notebooks or first day outfits, Caden Satya Ortiz opened his laptop and typed out the same email. He sent the message to each of his teachers at Robinson Secondary School in Northern Virginia. I'm transgender. I use he, him, his pronouns. Please put this in your records now. It didn't always work. Ortiz, 22, cannot remember how many times educators or classmates addressed him with the old name, which is called the dead name, the wrong pronouns. He does remember how it felt. It hits you every time. It's a physical pain. And then I like this section down here. Two Democrats, Delegate Marcus B. Simon and Delegate Joshua G. Cole, co-sponsored a measure in the House. This is the Virginia House, while State Senator Jennifer B. Boysko introduced companion legislation in the Senate. So look up that article if you're interested. We're either working towards a more compassionate world or we're not. So I invite folks to get on board. So I have one or two more comments before I get to the end of the screencast. I think this book ought to be in every public library, both a circulating copy and a reference copy. At least one circulating copy, at least one reference copy. And I think this book is also of interest and use to people far outside the library profession. So anybody in the human services field, and that would be social workers, medical workers, many people could benefit from reading this book. And people in the transportation business. So many folks could benefit from reading this book. So it was written to help library staff, but I think it has widespread applicability. I think it's going to be purchased by some churches and synagogues, mosques, and temples. People who want their membership, their congregations, to be mindful of these issues will purchase this book. Here in the Washington, D.C. area, there's the Potter's House in Adams Morgan, which is a coffee house and bookstore run by the Church of the Savior. I'm expecting that they might be purchasing a copy of this book. And this book also might make for a very interesting, useful book in a college course or a high school course on EDI, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So there are schools out there who are thinking about these issues and might want to use this book as part of their readings. As I mentioned, this is a very accessible book. You could read it through in one weekend, but to really benefit from it, you're going to read it more than once. So this is Phil Shapiro. For those who might be curious, the screencast, I made it using free software. Simple screen recorder. You could use the same software yourself. I have a ThinkPad. I bought it on eBay for under $200. I connect it to my 4K monitor, so it's high resolution. But you don't need to do screencasting in high resolution. That's just a choice I make. If you would like to see the other video book reviews I made, you can visit sites.google.com/site Phil Shapiro Book Reviews. Here's my contact information. You might want to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And these are writings that I've done. I've done some writings about public libraries, and you can access them by going to this website called sites.google.com/site library writings. And that includes links to different things I've written about libraries over the past 20 years or so. So see you next time. Thank you, Stephen G. Kruger. You've written an excellent book.